want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
So, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
All right. We are joined today by Stephen Brill. Stephen is a guy who has been around American journalism and writing for a very long time, created American Lawyer, Content, Court TV. You did Clear, which I did not know until today. And so Stephen has been around American media for a long time. He has written a really important new book about this moment we find ourselves in. The book is called The Death of Truth: How Social Media and the Internet Gave Snake Oil Salesmen and Demagogues the weapon they needed to destroy trust and polarize the world, and what we can do about it. We're going to dive in today on this with Stephen because he's also the co-founder of NewsGuard. It is a really important organization that tracks disinformation and goes after it very directly, very bluntly, very clearly in calling it out as this massive amount of fake information has started to really reshape our country, our politics, our culture. Stephen, welcome to the Enemies List. I'm so grateful you came on today.
Well, thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what led you to write the book, Death of Truth.
Well, the world I've been living in as someone running NewsGuard, basically at some point I sort of had an epiphany, which is we're living in a world where it has become so chaotic and so polarized. And the cause of that has to do with four basic factors, two of them having to do with technology and two of them having to do with people and the American system. The two technology forces are social media platforms, which we all learned beginning in about 2018, when NewsGuard was started in 2019, that their business model depends on giving people the most inflammatory, inaccurate, divisive content. That's
Right.
not a bug, that's a feature of social media platforms. And it began even in 2018 when we started NewsGuard. We thought, well, we're right in the middle of this terrible storm because people aren't taking measles vaccines, and
Right.
the Russians are trying to corrupt the American elections with misinformation and disinformation about the Clinton campaign and a whole variety of divisive myths that they're posting online.
Mm-hmm.
The world just looks like a terribly divisive place. And that was 2018. So that was before COVID. That was before Stop the Steal. That was before all the myths about vaccines. That was before the Israel-Hamas war. That was before what became a real storm and continues to be a storm,
Mm-hmm.
which is now exacerbated by generative AI. So basically, you don't have any idea what to believe. With generative AI, for example, when the Access Hollywood tape came out in 2016
Mm-hmm.
about President Trump, he basically had to apologize for it. Today, he would easily and persuasively say, well, that's just a deep fake. That's
Fake
just
news.
generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we really wouldn't know whether to believe it or not because there is so much of that out there. So that's one of the technology forces. The other
Mm-hmm.
technology force, which I guarantee 90% of your audience has no idea about, is programmatic advertising.
Sure.
And programmatic advertising, which was also developed as a great technology breakthrough in the early 2000s
Mm-hmm.
and has expanded rapidly since to cover about 80% of all advertising. Programmatic advertising means that ads are placed by algorithm in an automated bidding process so that a fake news site can get just as much financial support or more than legitimate news sites. So, as I point out in The Death of Truth, there came a point a couple of years ago where the largest single financial supporter of Sputnik, the Russian propaganda
Right.
site, was Warren Buffett, the icon of American capitalism. And that's not because he woke up every morning and said, "How do I send more money to Vladimir Putin?" It's because he owns Geico, the giant insurance company, which does zillions of dollars worth of programmatic advertising. So you have these two technology forces.
Right.
Layer onto them the ambitious demagogues, hoaxsters, conspiracy theorists who want to take advantage of those two technology phenomena. And then layer onto that the fact, as you've often pointed out, that for many people in this country, the system stopped working in the 80s and 90s. One of the most disheartening polls is if you ask, the average person today in America, are your children going to be more prosperous than you? They say no. And so there's a whole slew of vulnerable people whose livelihoods were cut off by global trade, people who during COVID, their kids couldn't go to public schools because the schools were closed while kids went to private schools. You put all that together and you have the figure, for example, of Dustin Thompson, who's someone I profiled in the book, who is a graduate of Ohio State, worked in a pest control business in Columbus, Ohio, until he was laid off during COVID. And on January 6th, this guy who never had a speeding ticket ends up in the Capitol, in a bulletproof vest, wielding a coat rack as a weapon, going after police. So that's what I try to chronicle, is how all this happened to us.
So I want to bifurcate the disinformation ecosystem into two areas. One, I think, is the commercial sort of spammy, and I kind of put domestic politics in there on one hand. But on the other side of this, and you just had a great article in Vanity Fair about how this system that's been built on the platforms of social media companies in America that are protected by Section 203, that cannot be sued for the harm they're causing, they've also become a massive channel of disinformation for primarily three bad actor sets: the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians. Talk to us a little bit about how you ended up in the crosshairs of the Russian disinformation machine because of the work you did with NewsGuard.
Right, and you've really put your finger on it. Those three bad actors have brought the art of disinformation to a new level, and it's only going to get worse because they're now using generative AI as a force multiplier for what they do. So NewsGuard does reports about all this stuff. We identify all this stuff. We did a report about a year ago in March, where we said that although YouTube had promised to take down Russian disinformation when the Ukrainian invasion happened, the only thing YouTube really did was they took down the two branded Russian disinformation sites, Sputnik and RT, and which really amounts to nothing, really.
Sure.
And they kept up all these other sites, and we documented that. And one of the sites we focused on was one which had produced a quote documentary unquote that had revealed, because these were independent journalists and only they could reveal this, that the U.S. had a secret bioweapons lab in Ukraine. And that was the ostensible reason, one of the reasons that the Russians gave for having to invade Ukraine, because, we got to do something about this bioweapons.
Biolabs.
Yeah. And we said, that's still on YouTube. So as soon as we published our report, YouTube took it down. The guy who produced this, quote, documentary, unquote, it turns out is an escaped fugitive from Florida,
John Dugan.
a former deputy sheriff
Mm-hmm.
who was given asylum in Russia and basically set up this this disinformation studio,
Right.
this machinery um, that produced all these documentaries, and now, as of a report we issued last week, is responsible for, if you can believe it, 167 different phony local news sites in the United States,
Right.
pushing all varieties of divisive Russian sponsored propaganda. So when we reported that, YouTube was embarrassed. They took it down, and that really pissed him off. So he did a YouTube video about me and about NewsGuard,
Mm-hmm.
accused us of being shills for the CIA,
Naturally.
and instruments of the deep state. And in the video, he talked about me, my family. He talked about where we live in Westchester County,
Mm-hmm.
and just for kickers, did a aerial shot of my home, and that engendered all kinds of death threats to our phone at home, to the office, etc. So we had a little bit of a touch of this, affecting us all the way from Moscow, which is where the FBI and their sister agencies determined he was when he created this YouTube video about me and my family.
But he's also been responsible for creating, as you guys have identified at NewsGuard, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these fake local seeming news sites around America that, using primarily the Facebook algorithm, have produced stories that a lot of people believe are like from the Tallahassee Journal, which doesn't exist. It's never existed. It's
Right.
completely fake. But there, with a combination of Chat GPT and what I call Chat KGB,
Right.
these Russian, they're generating massive amounts of disinformation, completely disguised as legitimate journalism and legitimate local news sites. And is there anything other than putting the light of day on those folks that we can do about that?
Well, sure. Well, first of all, putting the light of day, which is what NewsGuard attempts to do.
Mm-hmm.
But second, the platforms can do more screening. I mean,
Sure.
These websites are created so that they can establish, Facebook accounts to promote the phony stories they're doing on their website. If you step back and think about it for a minute, and as I explained in the book, I had an epiphany at one point where I'm at a conference of media executives.
Right.
And they're all talking about exactly what we're talking about. And one of them says, sort of matter-of-factly, well, YouTube and Facebook, they post, thousands of videos a minute. How are they supposed to screen it all? And everybody sort of shakes their head. Yeah, that's a good point. And it just dawned on me, well, who said they have to post thousands of those things a minute?
Mm-hmm.
Their answer is, well, that's the demand we get. People want to post. Well, the real answer is their business model is the more content that's up there,
Right.
the more money they make, because the more eyeballs they get and the more advertising revenue they get from programmatic advertising.
Yep.
So I raised the question, well, in what other industry do you get to say, well, demand is so high that we can't worry about the safety of our product? So, for example, every time you walk into a restaurant, if you look around, you'll see a sign that says occupancy by more than X number of people is dangerous and unlawful, right? It's a fire safety regulation.
Right.
Same thing happens if you go to theater. There's a fire safety regulation.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't, no one says, well, gee, that impinges on my First Amendment right to free assembly. They say, well, that's a fire safety regulation. Obviously, we can't have, the restaurant can't say, or the theater can't say, well, 1,000 people want to come to our theater tonight, even though we only have room for 300 people. So we're going to take 1,000. No one would allow that.
Right.
Or a car company can't say, so many people want our car that we can't really monkey around with seat belts and airbags, because that would slow down the process and we wouldn't be able to sell as many cars.
Well, as
No,
you said, if Elon Musk sold a Tesla that explodes, he's legally liable. If he sells
exactly.
a product on X that causes people to, I don't know, storm the Capitol or engage in violence,
Or
there's
not
no
take a COVID vaccine.
right, or yeah, or die because or not vaccinate their kids for polio or
Yeah,
whatever. Section 230 protects him almost absolutely from any kind of liability. I mean,
right.
is that part of the real fix here? And I know that's a high
Well,
hill to climb because
well,
Washington is full of lobbyists, but
well, that's a high hill to climb, but I suggest a much lower hill that would achieve the same thing.
okay.
And that is right now, if you go to, Facebook or YouTube, your favorite, platform,
Hmm.
you'll see terms of service. And the terms of service say, we won't tolerate hate speech. We won't tolerate harmful misinformation.
Right.
We won't tolerate state sponsored disinformation. It's basically a list of all the things they do tolerate,
Sure.
but they say they won't tolerate it. Those terms of service, if you read them, they are a contract.
Right.
It's a contract between you and them. They are breaching that contract. The contract doesn't say, we don't like harmful disinformation. We don't like misinformation. We don't like, bullying of children. But, there's so much demand for posting on our product. There's so many people want to post that there really isn't anything we can do about it. So you're on your own. That's not what the
Right.
terms of service says. But that's what they say when they go to Congress every 6 months and apologize and say, we're really sorry. We really know we have to do better. We really take this seriously. And by the way, we're really sorry. And we know we have to do better. And we're going to do a better job. And we really take this seriously. That's what they say in Congress. What they're really saying is, well, so many people want to use our product and we want to make so much money that we don't want to cut our profit margins by
Hmm.
limiting the number of people who can post X times a day or by hiring more people to screen it. So to come back to what
Right.
we were talking about, you could easily have someone screen a Facebook post that refers to one of John Dugan's, websites where he says that,
Sure.
war has broken out in Boston over the Trump verdict. You could say, well, that's not true. Why are we posting that?
Yeah. I look. I think in some ways one thing we really miss is the same algorithmic tools that pollute so much of our social media and online experience could also be used to address the pollution in our online social media experience.
Right.
The AI,
It's editing.
right?
You know.
The AI that generates false stories can also be spotted by AI to spot false
Yes.
stories. And
Yes.
and look, I get that there's no profit margin in that for Facebook or for Google, but it certainly seems like something that if they cared about the direction of the country and the harm that these sites are absolutely being proven to cause, and I don't mean just like the algorithmically generated stuff that targets kids and TikTok
Yeah.
and things like that. Um,
But you don't have to, you've said something, you said, well, the business model is this, and I understand they don't want to cut their profits. Well, you don't understand why a car company should, a car company would be able to take the position of, we don't want to cut our profits, so we're not going to install seatbelts.
right,
Or
right. You would never
why
accept that argument in the
Yeah.
culture.
There isn't any industry. I mean, just sort of step back and think about the Fox litigation, brought by Dominion, the voting machine company.
Sure.
So Fox paid, $787 million for doing exactly what the social media platforms do. Fox decided that the way to keep their audience glued to the
Mhm.
television was to please them by reinforcing what that audience wanted to believe.
That's right.
That's so in essence, they applied the same algorithm that Facebook and YouTube apply.
right.
The only difference is, and the people who were cited in the lawsuit as saying all these libelous things about the voting machine company, those people said the same libelous things online,
Sure.
but the platforms didn't get sued. A couple of the people got sued, like Rudy Giuliani, but the platforms didn't get sued. But Fox got sued. It almost makes you feel sorry for Fox.
Well, in this case, I mean, I think they paid, as you said, 780 something million. I suspect when the Dominion case hit them, they thought, "Oh, this hurts a little bit, but we're still making a lot of money."
Yeah.
I think after Smartmatic is done, and Smartmatic, as you know, was a much bigger company with much greater losses. That's they're going to be. We're talking about a judgment likely in the billions when it comes to Smartmatic, and I think there's going to be a pain level that hits them that will make the social media companies even more determined to preserve Section 230. I mean, what a lot of folks aren't aware of, there is a Section 230 and the social media companies is basically a full employment act for lobbyists in D.C. right now. And I mean this on the left and the right and the center. They hire everybody from lobbyists, who are close to Mike Johnson, to lobbyists who are close to Nancy Pelosi, lobbyists who are close to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and lobbyists who are close to AOC. They are protecting this. This is the hill those companies will absolutely die on, even though a lot of people are dying, as you point out. That you guys studied that there were probably 225,000 deaths from COVID.
Right. I was just going to mention
people bought into the misinformation about the vaccines.
Yeah, this isn't hypothetical. This is real stuff. There's a scene in the book where there's a guy who is who's gone down the rabbit hole, the COVID rabbit hole. That COVID is a hoax and COVID is just BS, and the vaccine is going to kill him. And he's on a ventilator. He has COVID. He's dying. It's literally the last few minutes of his life. He's on this ventilator, takes the ventilator off, and says to his doctor, "This COVID thing is just total bullshit." And then he dies. He doesn't even believe his own lungs. He believes the internet, not his own lungs. So how did we get to this place? And how do we get out of this place?
Mm-hmm.
There's another, you'll appreciate this one. There's another scene. There's a couple in New Jersey, retired couple, who were plaintiffs in the Trump University case. Remember Trump University?
Of course, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So Trump University was proven to be this complete fraud.
Absolute fraud.
Total fraud. Mm-hmm. So here's a couple who, among the marketing materials they got that convinced them to part with what was sort of their last $35,000 was a picture of a couple who were greeters at Walmart. And the marketing material said, if you don't want to spend your last days as greeters at Walmart, here's an alternative.
Right.
And the alternative was to make millions learning Trump's secrets of the real estate business, which of course never happened. Right. So they decided. So they paid $35,000. They enrolled. They decided it was completely worthless, and they signed on to this class action lawsuit. So I was doing a piece for Time Magazine in early 2016, just as the Trump campaign was starting to take off, about Trump University. And I'm interviewing them, and they're explaining all this to me. And finally, sort of at the end of the interview, I say, sort of offhandedly, well, I guess you're not going to vote for Donald Trump. And they said, oh, no, we're voting for him. And I said, wait a minute, you swore an affidavit, you swore a complaint that said he swindled you out of your last $35,000. How can you be voting for him? They said, well, we sort of heard online that he really wasn't that involved in it. Some people used his name, but it really wasn't him. And, we hope we get the money back from Trump University, but it's really not Trump. And, Trump's going to fight for us. And these are people he stole from them. They swore that he stole from them, and they voted for him.
The idea of Trump's own victims being his biggest defenders is one that since 2016 has shocked me. I was interviewing a guy who'd been a contractor on one of the casino properties who Trump had completely screwed over. completely, the guy literally declared bankruptcy because Trump would not pay him, lost his business, lost his home, and yet, well, I can't vote for communist Marxists like,
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton. She's a pedophile, and
Yeah.
and this idea they are fed this diet of complete and the conspiracies that seem to move them, at least from my observation, they now all believe that every Democrat is a pedophile, that every Democrat is part of a Marxist
give
takeover.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a quiz.
Sure.
What was the day after? What was the single most important thing that pundits talked about when Trump came down the escalator and gave his speech?
You know what? I'm going to guess Hillary's emails.
No, I thought you were going to guess, Mexicans are rapists, which is what
there's
everybody
that.
now
Yeah.
talks about. The single most important thing that people thought was the most persuasive and rang true the most was when he said, and he led the speech with this, was, I'm a billionaire, and therefore I don't want any campaign contributions. I'm not going to take any. I'm not going to take any campaign contributions. And every time, I mean, to this minute of this day, every time I read a story where they talk about, well, he's going to use this to raise money, he's going to use this to raise money, or he raised this much money last month and his PAC is putting in this much money, I say to myself, why aren't any of these reporters reminding everyone that the core premise of his campaign was, I'm a rich guy, I don't have to raise money? Everybody's forgotten that.
That is one of that is so true. And the other thing that I've told people forever, having been a close observer of Trump for a very long time, the only successful business he's ever truly sustained now for almost 10 years is his email fundraising business.
Yeah,
that has been a magnificent success for Donald Trump. Everything else, once you penetrate the illusion of that people were sold by watching The Apprentice, it's all been fake. It's all been BS. It's all been a sort of illusion about that. So before we wrap up, Stephen, I want to ask you, because we can easily get in the sort of like despair spiral on stories like this about how tough this is. Talk to us about some of the strategies that you talk about in the book that will help people fight back against this massive disinformation machine.
Well, they sort of fall into two categories. One relating to the technology, the social media platforms, the programmatic advertising.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of things I suggest, and nothing I suggest requires Congress to do anything because, as you know better than I, Congress can't even name a post office.
Correct.
The FTC could right now sue the platforms for violating their terms of service.
Mm-hmm.
The FTC could promulgate a reg saying that you can't have anonymous accounts online. Everybody's got to be there. They have to identify themselves, and that has to be checked. That would do a ton to get the John Dugans of the world, sitting in Moscow creating, sites of for news in Peoria, Illinois, would not like that.
Correct.
You cannot. So you can't have anonymity. The FTC could sue. There are a couple of other things you could do on the technology side. You could require that public companies, the SEC could require that public companies have to reveal once a year all the websites where they spent more than $100,000 on advertising. Mm-hmm. As soon as that happened, what I hear when I talk to these blue chip companies that end up on these horrible websites is, the CEO has no idea. I mean, Warren Buffett can't have any idea that he was sending money to Putin, right?
No.
So if they had to file a list every year with the SEC, instead of being clueless, they would have a clue. And you would clean up a lot of that very quickly. So that's on the sort of the technology side. On the political side, and oddly enough, I do sort of venture into the political side of this, is two things that you could do through citizen initiatives, which, as you know, are now starting to take hold around the country. Mm-hmm. You could get rid of partisan primaries and have a top two primary or ranked choice voting, but the partisan primary system basically encourages Republicans to be the most Republican they can be and Democrats to be the most Democratic they can be, encourages polarization. And hand in hand with that is gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is sort of the political equivalent of the algorithms, sending you into, your corner where
Yep.
you get to read the stuff you agree with and talk to the people you agree with. That's what gerrymandering does. And if you instead, as again, there's some states that have already had ballot initiatives that deal with this, and I think Ohio is trying to do it right now. If you apportioned state legislative seats and federal legislative seats into districts that are basically geographic, not these crazy things where you engineer, putting
Sure.
all the African Americans in one congressional district so they get their congressman and everybody else gets the rest. You know better than I that you have systems where in Wisconsin the legislative vote is 52-48 maybe Republican Democratic, but the state legislature is 75-25. If you ended that and ended the partisan primary system, you would really do a lot to undercut the polarization that these social media platforms really feed on and exacerbate.
Well, I think one of the things that you're exactly right about that, Stephen. Because my former wife dealt with redistricting in Florida a few times, and the killer app of American political reform right now would be nonpartisan redistricting commissions that actually have teeth and make sense, and it would reshape the incentive structure to be crazy on both sides of the political equation. Yes, America, you would have a lot fewer Marjorie Taylor Greens. You would have a lot fewer Rashida Tlaibs. You'd have a lot more people in the center right, center left. And I don't know about you, Stephen, but I think that's an America that's a central reform that would also dismantle some of the disinformation ecosystem that incentivizes both of those polar edges. Well, Stephen, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. This is I think a really important book, folks, and I think you really ought to read The Death of Truth. Stephen is an expert on this area. NewsGuard does tremendously important work in this space, and I wish you all the best on the book, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks. Hope we can do it again.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Stephen.
Thanks, Rick.